Hello children, it's time for chapter 7 of A Bear Called Paddington. So this chapter is entitled Adventure at the Seaside. One morning Mr. Brown tapped the barometer in the wall. It looks as if it's going to be a nice day, he said. How about a trip to the sea? His remark was greeted with enthusiasm by the rest of the family, and in no time at all the house was in uproar. Mrs. Bird started to cut a huge pile of sandwiches while Mr. Brown got the car ready. Jonathan and Judy searched for their bathing suits and Paddington went up to his room to pack. An outing which involved Paddington was always rather a business, as he insisted on taking all his things with him. As time went by, he had acquired lots of things. As well as his suitcase, he now had a smart weekend grip with the initials PB inscribed on the side, and a paper carrier bag for the odds and ends. For the summer months, Mrs. Brown had bought him a sun hat. It was made of straw and very floppy. Paddington liked it, for by turning the brim up or down, he could make it different shapes, and it was really like having several hats in one. When we get to Brightsea, said Mrs. Brown, we'll buy you a bucket and spade. Then you can make a sandcastle. And you can go to the pier, said Jonathan eagerly. They've got some super machines on the pier. You'd better bring plenty of coins. And we can go swimming, added Judy. You can swim, can't you? Not very well, I'm afraid, replied Paddington. You see, I've never been to the seaside before. Never been to the seaside? Everyone stopped what they were doing and stared at Paddington. Never, said Paddington. They all agreed that it must be nice to be going to the seaside for the first time in one's life. Even Mrs. Bird began talking about the time she first went to Brightsea many years before. Paddington became very excited as they told him all about the wonderful things he was going to see. The car was crowded when they started off. Mrs. Bird, Judy and Jonathan sat in the back. Mr. Brown drove and Mrs. Brown and Paddington sat beside him. Paddington liked sitting in the front, especially when the window was open, so that he could poke his head out in the cool breeze. After a minor delay, when Paddington's hat blew off on the outskirts of London, they were soon on the open road. Can you smell the sea yet, Paddington? asked Mrs. Brown after a while. Paddington poked his head out and sniffed. I can smell something, he said. Well, said Mr. Brown, keep on sniffing because we're almost there. And sure enough, as they reached the top of a hill and rounded a corner to go down the other side, there it was in the distance, glistening in the morning sun. Paddington's eyes opened wide. Look at all the boats on the dirt, he explained, pointing in the direction of the beach with his paw. Everyone laughed. That's not dirt, said Judy, that's sand. By the time they'd explained all about sand to Paddington, they were in Brightsea itself, and driving along the front. Paddington looked at the sea rather doubtfully. The waves were much bigger than he'd imagined, not so big as the ones he'd seen on his journey to England, but quite large enough for a small bear. Mr. Brown stopped the car by a shop on the esplanade and took out some money. I'd like to fit this bear out for a day at the seaside, he said to the lady behind the counter. Let's see now. We shall need a bucket and a spade, a pair of sunglasses, one of those rubber tyres. As he reeled off the list, the lady handed the articles to Paddington, who began to wish he had more than two paws. He had a rubber tyre round his middle, which kept slipping down to his knees, a pair of sunglasses perched precariously on his nose, his straw hat, a bucket and spade in one hand, and his suitcase in the other. Photograph, sir? Paddington turned to see an untidy man with a camera looking at him. Only £1, sir. Results guaranteed. Money back if you're not satisfied. Paddington considered the matter for a moment. He didn't like the look of the man very much, and he had been saving hard for several weeks, and now had just over £3. It would be nice to have a picture of himself. Won't take a minute, sir, said the man, disappearing behind a black cloth at the back of the camera. Just watch the birdie. Paddington looked around. There was no bird in sight as far as he could see. He went round behind the man and tapped him. The photographer, who appeared to be looking for something, jumped and then emerged from under his cloth. How do you expect me to take your picture if you don't stand in front? He asked in an aggrieved voice. Now I've wasted a plate and... He looked shiftily at Paddington. That will cost you £1. Paddington gave him a hard stare. "You said there was a bird," he said, "and there wasn't." "I expect it flew away when it saw your face," said the man nastily. "Now, where's my £1?" Paddington looked at him even harder for a moment. "Perhaps the bird took it when it flew away," he said. "Ha, ha, ha," cried another photographer who had been watching the proceedings with interest. "Fancy you being taken in by a bear, Charlie. Serves you right for trying to take photographs without a licence. Now be off with you before I call a policeman." He watched while the other man gathered up his belongings and slouched off in the direction of the pier. Then he turned to Paddington. "These people are a nuisance," he said, "taking away the living from honest folk. You did quite right not to pay him any money, and if you'll allow me, I'd like to take a nice picture of you myself as a reward." The Brown family exchanged glances. "I don't know," said Mrs. Brown. "Paddington always seems to fall on his feet."